Hey y'all. How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? About to get started on this conversation with Jeff. Let me go on live and let people know. All right. Hey, hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, I can't hear you. Hold
Oh,
on. Why can't I hear you? Hold on. That's my problem, I think. Hold on. Are you talking now?
hello, hello.
There you
Nice,
are.
nice.
There you are. Let me just tell these people over here we are live right now on YouTube. So check out the link in my bio. Having a conversation. How do you pronounce your last name?
It's Mabute Louis.
So the ML is ML. I was like, watch me be. I was like, okay, so we are over here on YouTube Live with Jeff Mabute Louis, but you know him as at Tito Senpai, and we are talking about this TikTok ban. And I just feel like the predictions have been accurate. So I want to hear more about what Jeff has to say. Join us at the link. You can go into my stories, and the link is right there. See y'all over there. See y'all over here. All right, I'm back.
Hey, hey,
So happy to have you, and really appreciate you joining us. Let me do some quick housekeeping. So
for
y'all,
sure.
please make sure that if you enjoy what you are watching, then please put up a black fist if you like something that is said, or just any fist if you like something that is said. Also, if you are watching this later on YouTube, can you please make sure to put the timestamp of anything that you feel like really hit you, or that you feel like people definitely need to know about. And it would also be helpful, if at all possible, to watch for a minimum of 20 minutes, even if you have to just leave the computer open and walk away, because this algorithm really likes to only share things that it feels like people have watched extensively. So that is a way for us to do that. So if you all could do that, I would be much obliged. And that is the end of that. Also want to remind you, Common Sense Kickback is an extension of my radio show, The Amanda Steele Show, which you can check out wherever you get your podcasts. And also we are syndicated in several cities, including Houston, Philly, Washington, D.C., Columbus, Ohio, to name a few. So hopefully you will be checking that out any day now. All right. Now, that being said, let me first say this. So ever so often, I feel like Instagram does what it's supposed to do, and actually like introduces me to people that I want to know. And to people with insights that I feel like are really thoughtful and that are really helpful to understanding just like concepts that may seem, complicated or esoteric, etc. And when I came across your page, I was like, oh, this is someone who gets it and who can also just like go to the heart of things very succinctly and very quickly, which is a skill. Okay.
Oh,
Like
that's very kind of you to say.
that's a skill. So I really was like, looking at your videos, and you had said, this TikTok ban, y'all need to pay attention. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm paying attention. And then literally everything that you said will come to pass came to pass. You're like, Canada's gonna ban it. Canada banned it. Then you're like, the UAE. I mean, sorry, not the UAE, the
The
EU.
UK. Yeah.
Yeah, the UK and the EU, they're coming next. And there we go. And there's like other things that you're talking about, like you pointed out not in relation to TikTok, but you were like, just so we're clear, guys, the methodology that the military is applying in Gaza is a mimic of what they did in Vietnam, etc. And I had done a live a few weeks back with Greg J. Stoker where we
I
talked
watched
about.
that, by the way. It was a
Oh
great live. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. But we talked about how like Vietnam is actually a really good model for trying to understand many facets of what's going on in Gaza. But so that being said, let's turn to you. So tell me a bit about yourself. You know, I really want to use this platform to expose folks to other voices. And, you know, we understand now that media is largely in part controlled and bullshit. So it's imperative that we are able to identify folks who may not be, you know, professional journalists, but are you may not be a professional journalist, but you are a confirmed smart person, intellectual and humane person. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, yeah, appreciate you bringing me on here. It took me a couple days to actually see your DM, and when I saw it, I was like, wait a minute. I've been following you since like forever, since watching Insecure and whatnot, and
What?
then seeing how you spoke up about the racism that happened in Ukraine. I remember I was like, wait a minute, like she's more than an actress. She's really cool. So, and then of course, seeing you post about Palestine, I was like, wow, that's somebody that is leveraging her platform well. So I appreciate everything you're doing and everything you've done. And yeah, big fan of yours. So I'm more than excited and happy to be here.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
So yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm just a normal dude. I have a normal day job. I didn't really start posting regularly on TikTok or Instagram since until October really. But I feel like you know, at first when October 7th happened, like I was consuming all this stuff and then it was actually my wife that was like, "Hey, like you've been researching a lot about geopolitics for a long time, but yet you haven't said anything about this." Or you
Mhm.
haven't even reposted because like I'm wasn't really on social media, but like she was like, but you could still reshare and repost things.
Right.
Yeah, so I started doing that, and then you know I started posting on TikTok, and it was pretty easy to use. And yeah, I feel like the culmination of what I've been posting about was the result of my own decolonization as a
Mhm.
Filipino American, as an ex-evangelical, as somebody that is of the Filipino diaspora that's in this imperial core as a brown skinned Asian trying to navigate his way around. So
You just said a lot. In this imperial core. Well, I think even in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but even in really understanding the true impact of this TikTok ban and the true goal of the TikTok ban, we first have to acknowledge like what is the imperial core, because it sounds like, you know, some place where they park like Death Stars. Um,
pretty close to that. Pretty close to that.
so what would you say is the imperial core?
Yeah, from my understanding, living in the imperial core is being a citizen amongst the imperial powers, specifically the US, but as well as their, vassal states of Canada, the UK, the EU, and you could even throw in um, you know, Australia, Japan, New
Right.
Zealand into that mix as well. So as a citizen inside these countries that are the preeminent imperial power because of the U.S. empire being I guess the lone superpower ever since World War II, and specifically after the Cold War, like that's as a citizen here, there are ways that we benefit from empire. There are ways that we are blind to what this empire does around the world, and there are ways that we are oppressed by this empire. So we, as citizens of the imperial core, need to find ways to resist, not only for our sake, but for the movements and people across the world.
So when we look at, you know, the imperial core and we consider like, okay, these are the powers, right? Like we talk about like the axis of evil, right? Like the powers that be. Um, what do you feel like within America upholds our power structure?
What can you clarify that again?
Yeah, like I feel like right now a lot of people are kind of getting awakened
Uh huh.
to what it means to be imperialist,
Yep.
right? What it means to be at the imperial core. So not just to be an imperialist, because there's other countries that are trying to do that, but they're not at the core yet.
Right.
You know what
Right.
I'm saying? But then what are the ways in which America has managed to not only be at the core, but maintain its position at the core? Does that make more sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think the way that America has been able to maintain its position, we're seeing that come into play through its own extensions of its empire. I think there is this uh, common belief right now that it is Israel and it is APAC that owns America. But I don't believe that to be the case. I don't ascribe to that because I believe that Israel is just an extension of US empire. It was around in the 1960s after the Six-Day War, where Israel defeated Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and I think Sudan in 6 days, that
Yeah.
the US empire saw was like, wait a minute, like this is a place that could potentially be our unsinkable aircraft or our a way into this resource rich region and project our hegemony, project our uh, own values, our own belief system, but also be able to extract resources and deploy military actions across that area. So, U.S. forms these partnership allies, but that eventually become like vassal states. Like it
Mhm.
was what's his name? He recently died. That old guy, Henry Kissinger said, "America does not have permanent friends, only permanent interests." So it's like
Ooh.
the U.S. is able to build these relationships, build these allyships, but in reality, they're as quick to dispose of them when they no longer serve that value. Case in point, Saddam Hussein. He was used by the U.S. empire to attack Iran, but then, of course, Iraq was invaded illegally by the United States in the early 2000s when he no longer served the U.S. interests.
So, why do we feel like this is now coming to really be exposed? Because the information you're talking about has been available, right? Like
Right.
it's been out here, like, but what is it about now that you feel like is allowing it to be exposed?
Yeah, great question. I think that's like at the heart of like what we're talking about here is the TikTok ban. It's uh, I think it's not only just TikTok as the tool, but the culmination of the past movements before this Free Palestine movement. From Occupy to Black Lives Matter to the civil unrest during Trump election and his presidency to what happened in COVID and to now in this Free Palestine movement. Like there's been a culmination of people that have been folding into these communities, have been doing their own learning. So when October 7th happened and people began to do their own research, there was already a movement of people that had been part of several anti-imperialistic movements, pro-justice movements that people could fold into. There were people that were ready to educate, people ready to spread the information. But the main difference now is, first and foremost, the people in Gaza that is risking their lives daily that brought us this live stream of this genocide in real time. Like that is the most powerful revealing and removal of the mask of empire of the US and Israel. And taking what they risked their lives to show us here and us taking that information and spreading it to our networks, our communities, and it really was a way to galvanize much quicker than before.
I mean, it brings new meaning to the revolution will not be televised, it will be live.
Exactly, exactly.
And
Like,
it's just go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's just it really I when Gil Scott Heron said that, I mean, I don't know if he had envisioned how that would look. But I think we are witnessing an awakening, and unfortunately, it is at the hands of so much death, destruction, and gaslighting and degradation, etc. And I always just marvel is not the word because it's more like dismay. Like I'm always dismayed at how much has to be lost for people to find like courage, to find curiosity, to even just find the strength to take in more than they were necessarily taking in before. And my biggest fear is which I know is going to come to pass, is that America itself is going to require that for the masses of America to respond in the way that so many around the globe are responding to Palestine.
Right, right. Yeah.
I mean, even like Roe v. Wade was just taken, and people are kind of like, man, that's crazy, and
Yeah.
that's it. With this TikTok ban, I feel like it's yet. I mean, and I'm not saying that it's like in its own in a vacuum, because I think it's like when people see a series of things and it's just like, what's the individual tipping point for them? What would you say is so impactful about the TikTok ban that you're noticing, or that even has impacted you? Like, why do you feel like this topic is so important?
Yeah. Great question. I think it's important because it's a similar playbook that the U.S. has been running. I know you said that I was able to predict things, but it's not because of my ability to see into the future. Otherwise, I'd be at the blackjack table every single day because it's a fun game, but I hate losing money. But yeah, like this is something that the U.S. have been doing in history, but also in recent geopolitical trends. What the US is doing with TikTok as well as to China, they did to Japan. The main difference back then was Japan was actually a quote unquote ally, but in reality, it is an occupied country which has about over 100 US military bases on it. So they can't like respond in the same way that China is responding now. So when Ronald Reagan, out of all people, placed like 100% tariffs on Japanese automobiles, Japanese electronics, and Japanese chips, like Japan couldn't really respond back. As well as they signed the Plaza Accords in the 80s, which purposely made not only the Japanese yen, but also the currencies of the UK, the France, and Germany, all their currencies to appreciate so that the US's currency would depreciate and it would give the US the edge in trade because they were running trade deficit with all these countries and specifically Japan. And so this was something that was signed into law or into an agreement between those countries, which basically continued to put the US on top in terms of trade, but also in terms of their technological advantage as well as their ability to compete, internationally.
So someone asked, MTR asked, yeah, also Japan gave up their self-defense, right?
Yep.
Can we speak more?
Yeah. So it was actually Douglas MacArthur, who was an American general that wrote the Constitution of Japan after Japanese surrender in World War II.
What are you talking about? Why don't I know anything about this? Okay.
So he actually wrote that Japan was not allowed to have a military, they're only allowed to have a defense force. So
What's the
that is
difference?
written into the Constitution of Japan, and which is why Japan has allowed so many US military bases in its own land.
What's the difference between a military and a defense force?
Defense force is limits to where you could, I guess, have interventions. You could only respond to attacks on your own mainland. But in terms of projecting power
Right, like you can
militarily,
Pearl Harbor again.
exactly, exactly. So basically, ever since World War II, Japan is a neo-colony of the United States.
Did y'all know this? Is this common knowledge? Did y'all know this? Is this common knowledge? I feel like this isn't common knowledge, Tito. Tito said, I feel like this isn't common knowledge, Jeff. I don't know. Like, I just feel like I never knew this. I mean, it makes complete sense, right? It makes complete sense. And it's actually, largely in part what Israel has been trying to do with Palestine every time you see these times. So every time you see that oh, it was a treaty and Palestine didn't accept the treaty, it looks like, oh, well, Palestine is just being curmudgeons, right? Like they're just being
Right, right.
difficult. But within these treaties, every time is a essential language that says we will make you castrated, and
Exactly.
we will continue to still be in control. And sure, you may be able to look like you're doing what you want to do, but we will still always have our thumb on you. And that is essentially what America did to Japan.
Yep, yep. And also, like the Oslo Accords did that to imposing the Palestinian Authority over the West Bank. So yeah, exactly, right on point.
So, wait, hold on. Someone had asked a good question. I'm trying to find it. Now, when you talked about the currencies, someone asked, what about the EU and China trying to create their own currencies not based on the petrodollar? Like, do we feel like this plays in anywhere to this whole TikTok ban?
Yeah, absolutely. This whole TikTok ban is just a part of the greater Cold War against China and the threat to the U.S. dollar and U.S. empire overall. This TikTok ban, like this is not the first attempt to ban something from China. Like in 2019, U.S. banned Huawei phones and 5G, and also told Canada, the UK, the EU, Australia to ban Huawei as well, which they complied with. Like Germany was on the verge of buying Huawei 5G technology, but the US said, nope, you're not allowed to do that, and they complied. They Canada even arrested the daughter of Huawei CEO in Canada and for extradition. Or it was because the U.S. wanted to extradite her to the U.S. because there was like this scandal of her like some fraud case about potentially doing business with Iran, which is a unilateral U.S. sanctions that prevents businesses that do business with America to do business with Iran as well. And so that's what they were trying to arrest her for. So she was like on house arrest for over a year or something like that. Something like that. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that, but it was a
It's
long time. And even now, there are potential bans on Chinese EVs and even the DJI drone company. There is a bill that could potentially ban them as well. So this is not the only, I guess, ban that is targeting China.
Now, a lot of people are saying that it's China, like this whole thing about it being about China is really a ruse and that there is actually more at play here. I think that there can be many things existing at one time.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Like even in the reality that, and I'm just using this as another example, even in the reality that um in the establishing of Israel and Palestine, it was simultaneously like, okay, this can be a quote unquote safe haven for Jews, which really was just like, listen, you don't like us. We don't want to deal with you. So this can serve us and it can serve you. And both these things can be true.
Right,
I
right,
think
right.
that I think that a lot of times people want it to just be one thing. And it's like, well, no, it's literally like, well, two in the hand, a bird in the hand is better than a bird than two in the bush. Like that's
Yeah,
really.
yeah, yeah.
So can you just give us a rundown, in your opinion, like what is the scope of this TikTok ban in terms of its reasons for taking place beyond just this China headline that's being given to us or fed to us
Yeah,
by
yeah, yeah.
the government controlled media?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So I definitely agree that more than one thing can be true. This is also not just about China. The thing we have to understand about the U.S. empire and the U.S. as a whole is that we're not a democracy; we're a corporate oligarchy. I can't remember. I think there was this study by Yale that shows that the things that the people wanted versus the things that corporations wanted, and how Congress voted as a whole, you know, always went towards corporations, and that's the reality of the U.S. And when I say corporate oligarchy, I also mean uh, lobbies of those corporations, or even the lobby of APAC. And there are so many different interests here that guide the U.S. in terms of domestic and foreign policy. And I think they're just I think there was going to be eventually a more concentrated push to ban TikTok in the future, but because of other corporate interests at play, such as APAC pushing Congress to enact this bill, it just sped up the timeline to now for that to happen.
So, can you speak more to this idea of what I would love just to give more education on, like, even these words that you're using, right? Like, it's a corporatocracy, oligarchy, etc. Like, let's really take it down to the bone bristle, okay?
Right, right,
Like,
right.
because none of this is really taught unless you actively seek it out, right? Even though we should all know all of these terms, I feel like when I was taught them, it was like a 1-day unit, that was more so about vocabulary than application. Um, so, what is a democracy compared to what we actually are? Because that is the language that's constantly used. We have to do XYZ to save this democracy. This is a challenge on our democracy. With this TikTok ban, a lot of people are like, this is them taking away our democracy. So what do you feel like is the version of democracy that we're sold versus what we're living?
Yeah. So the version of democracy that we're sold is that we have a voice to our government. We have this free and fair election that anyone who has a vote or anyone who is a citizen has the ability to vote, and therefore this is a democracy. Your vote matters. Your vote makes an impact. But what we're really choosing are representatives that are also having to raise money, and that money is funded through lobbies, as well as those lobbies are funded by corporations. And so that's where the term corporate oligarchy come from, is like uh, after the monarchy there was different like nobles and ruling class, and they were called the oligarchy. That they were like what came after, like kings and rulers, that was a political system that was at play back in feudalism, but then the oligarchy took their place. But
The
here
rich
we don't have,
mofos.
excuse me?
The rich mofos.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
So here we don't have like royalty per se, but we have these corporations that run everything. And they make their interest known to lobbies based on their funding and their donation. And there's just so many different lobbies out there. And right now, top of mind is APAC, which is what we're hearing because of what we're seeing in Gaza, because of the way that our government and their representatives are speaking and giving excuses for what Israel is doing in Gaza.
And APAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee.
Right,
And
right.
they are the ones who, I know y'all have been hearing this APAC, 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 and they are the ones who are funding, largely in part, both bipartisan, by the way, both
Mm-hmm.
Republican and Democrats, who will, basically vote in their favor and support policy that supports Israel. And like, I just saw where, I can't remember the representative, but they had put over $400,000 behind somebody to unseat a Democratic representative who had up until this point, basically was probably serving them. And then in the present day is like, wait, we can't go along with this, and has now formally asked for a ceasefire. They put over $400,000 against getting this person removed. Now, I want to let y'all know that I actually am doing a YouTube live on Monday with Eva of If Not Now, which, a lot of us know If Not Now is the Jewish organization that is really working to, when you see all of these like protests with everyone in the black shirts that say ceasefire now, like that's If Not Now. And they are putting together their own PAC to challenge APAC.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people have felt really like helpless, like, okay, we're doing all this talking, but like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And so this is a real step towards really challenging and putting the money together and progress. So I really feel like that's something that you guys should mark your calendars for. We're going to be on here on Monday. And I just a side note real quick, Jeff, I see people in the chat saying that YouTube is not sending them alerts. for when I go live. And yeah,
Repression. That's why they want you to stay on American apps.
yes.
Although there is tons of repression in TikTok because the servers are actually in Texas and hosted by Oracle, which is
So
watched
talk
by
to that.
CIA and FBI.
Please talk to that, because I think that a lot of people, when they hear time, China and TikTok, they're like, oh, well, China is against us and China's going to force them to give us, etc. But like, what is the actual reality of the technology and how it exists?
Yeah, great question. So with the whole privacy and data stuff, that's all BS. Like there are so many
Mm,
different apps out there that already acquire our data, and if China wanted to, they could buy that from any corporation that we, use their apps or use their websites. That is the very real reality of privacy here in this country. Like China doesn't need TikTok to access our information. Any corporation could buy our data. That's how like we get targeted ads. That's how people know who to contact when they're like been doing research on something like Zillow or dog leashes on Amazon. Like everything is integrated on the internet, and our data is already out there. But with TikTok servers being in Texas, that was, I think, part of the compromise of when Trump actually tried to ban TikTok the first time around. And so, in order to comply with that privacy that they claim, where like China, the CCP party could access it, TikTok moved their servers to Texas on Oracle servers, and that's how the CIA, the NSA is actually able to repress content on TikTok.
got it. So basically, their issue is not about China being able to get our info. It's about them being able to control how we receive info.
Yep, they're already doing that though. So like the TikToks or the reels that you reposted, 3 out of 4 of those are censored on TikTok. Like
Of your reels?
yeah, they're censored on TikTok.
Well, someone here said, are we just going to ignore how China isn't allowing the TikTok foolery in their country? So I'm assuming when you say the TikTok foolery, you guys are referring to the fact that like China only shows certain content to certain groups. Is that accurate? I
I
think kids can only see
yeah, I
like there's
think
an age.
yeah, I'm not too well versed in this, but from my understanding is there is TikTok is like the app for the international audience, and then Douyin is the Chinese version of TikTok. And there is, Douyin has to comply with Chinese laws, which censor what they can and can't show. But those Chinese laws are not American laws. And TikTok is following every single American law, even hosting the servers in Texas by Oracle.
So where would you say is the next phase of this TikTok ban? Like where would you say, based on your study of the imperial core of geopolitical politics, where do you think this TikTok ban is going?
Yeah, I think, it got passed in Congress in like record time, 81%. Like you only see that type of voting when it comes to like things like defense spending and stuff like that. Like that's one of the most bipartisan things that we've seen. But in the Senate, with elections coming up, I think it's going to be delayed. They're going to sit on it. That's why they said we're going to do our due diligence, because they don't want this TikTok ban to affect their possibility of reelection. So I think the steam's going to slow down until after the elections. And based on who is in the Senate and who is the president, I think it'll still go in the same direction, because like both Democrats and Republicans basically are two sides of the same coin, and their foreign policy is the same. Like they are still, are, even though there are two choices, they basically have the same policy as politicians here in the US empire.
I think when Okay, so before I was radicalized, I used to feel frustrated when people would say the Republicans and the Democrats are the same, because I would see very clearly that Republicans are very loud about their racism, about their
Right.
xenophobia, they're very loud about their classism, etc. And I would say, they're actually creating legislation that does these things, whereas even if Democrats feel that way, they're not actually creating legislation. The other argument that I would make would always be, even if Democrats feel this way, their lack of loudness doesn't encourage society to behave and support in that way, right? Like, we know Joe Biden is racist. We know Donald Trump is racist, but Joe Biden isn't necessarily inciting the masses to behave
Right.
in this way, and Donald Trump is. So what I used to feel like was, you can't say they're the same because they're acting different. How would you challenge that?
Yeah, great point. I want to take a step back. That's why I mentioned in terms of foreign policy, they're the
Mm-hmm.
same. So that's why, in reference to what happens to TikTok, they're going to go in the same trajectory because they are two sides of the same coin with regards to being politicians of the U.S. empire and the policies that they enact in terms of expanding their hegemony or maintaining their power. That is a very real thing here in the U.S. Is like there are very harmful policies that Trump has enacted, and his, I guess, how many did he nominate to the Supreme Court? Like three that
Yes.
have swung the Supreme Court in right wing's favor, which have led to Roe versus Wade being, repealed and led to the affirmative action being repealed. And those are very real things, very harmful things. And as people of color, like we are affected by that directly. And I think, like, me saying they're the same thing is, I think that is fair, is a bit reductive, but the reality is, I think, like, me being a leftist, me being like, I think, like, we need a whole new system entirely because, like I
There's
said, we're not a democracy. We're just voting between the same two things over however many decades, and things haven't gotten better. Things have gotten worse.
I think sometimes, and I felt you when you said, it may feel reductive, because I think sometimes people hear that and they are looking at things on a black and white versus
Hmm.
on a spectrum,
Right.
right? And I think that the misinterpretation is that the Republicans are here and that Democrats are here, when it's really kind of more so like this.
Yeah, especially
You
when you
know,
take the whole world into play. Like the
talk
the
about that.
liberals, they're actually would be considered right wing in most countries.
Please say more.
I mean, that's what we've heard internationally. Like even in the EU, like there are parliaments would have like socialists on them. But even here in Texas, uh, socialist parties can't be placed on the ballot. So there are laws in place that keeps the status quo in terms of elections.
Keep going. Keep going. You're teaching us so much.
Yeah. So like I found that out like only recently, because like with what was happening in Palestine, and the only, I guess, political party that I saw here in the U.S. that was like vocal about Gaza and the what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people, the genocide that they're committing, and naming it as a genocide, is PSL. And I found out that through my research and through my interactions with them, that Texas doesn't allow socialists on the ballot. It's just a law that they have enacted that has been in place since the Red Scare during the Cold War.
Interesting. So this is a state by state thing. It's not federal.
It's not federal. I'm
Okay.
only aware of it in Texas because I live here.
I think that that's one of those things, though, that I hope you guys are listening and you look into in your state. What are the laws in your state against who or for who can be on the ballot, right? When we're talking about how do we change the entire system? I think that's a very large, scope of thought for folks. Like it can feel very kind of like daunting and impossible, right? But
Mm-hmm.
so much of the work that I find myself doing now as I become more radicalized and informed is really being able to just identify things like what you just said, like these points of obstacles, of hindrance that have been created. Like if you're thinking about a pinball machine, right?
Right,
It's
right.
like these flaps that have
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
been, put in place to really make the ball go where they want it to go. And so many of us have no idea that these are even there.
Yeah. I didn't know until this year, 2024.
What do you feel like are okay? So let's say now I know that they've said that the TikTok ban is it's not really a ban. They're going to give them 6 months to sell it. What would you say if we're just using the knowledge that you have of the past? Let's say they sell it. Who do you think they're going to sell it to? And what do you think would shift in the way it operates? Or what do you think would shift from the way it operates currently?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know
And we're
who
just
can.
pontificating here.
Yeah, yeah,
We're just, no one is here saying this is what's going to happen. As Cleo told me, we're
yeah.
just talking.
Yeah, I mean, the value of TikTok alone is like, I think 250 billion, $300 billion. So very few people, very few companies could outright buy them. But um, if it does happen that they are sold, it'll be a portion of TikTok. Uh, but I think at the core of it, there's two things that the U.S. is trying to achieve besides what's happening in Israel, of course. One of them is they can't compete with TikTok, so they're trying to take the
What do you mean
source
by
code.
compete?
Well, if you take a look at all the different social media apps, they're losing to TikTok. The audience, like 170 million Americans are on TikTok. Like hundreds of thousands of small businesses have found livelihood on TikTok, and that is a moat that is slowly building. And not only is TikTok competing against Meta and X, they're slowly going to compete against YouTube, slowly going to compete against Amazon, and even Google. Like I know I've searched on TikTok about a specific news first before going on Google before, right? Like this is the trajectory of TikTok. If you're familiar with how these mega apps in Asia works, there are like apps in Asia where you could uh, hail a cab, but also use it to pay for your ride in the subway, or to order food or do banking. Like that's kind of the apps that companies have been building in Asia, and that's the trajectory of where TikTok wants to go. But here in the US, what they want first and foremost is one to be able to get that source code from TikTok that makes it so addicting, that curation of content,
Mhm.
because there's Instagram Reels, there's YouTube Shorts. They're trying to imitate that, but it's not as good. um, and that's what I mean by these companies aren't able to compete with TikTok, and so they want to eliminate competition in the same way that America curbed competition in Japan back in the 80s and early 90s.
So America was able to curb competition with Japan by us being able to control so much of Japan. I mean, they still sell their cars here and everything, but where does the militarization of where does our military presence in Japan intersect with the ability to, curb and control competition?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
like,
does it at all? Like, how do the
yeah,
two? I guess what I'm
y-
asking is like, I understood when you were saying before that we were able to curb militarization by Japan,
yeah,
but I would love to hear more about like, and the reason why, if y'all are wondering like, why is she on this? Because you said earlier, you were like, listen, I'm not psychic. Like I'm just able to follow trends. And I've
yeah.
seen these practices before. And so when I notice the same series of things again, it leads us to what's coming and it can help us to know how we can move ahead
Right.
of what's coming. So in terms of this way that they were able to curb competition with Japan, like what was that all about? How did they do that?
Yeah. When America, Ronald Reagan imposed 100% tariffs on Japanese automobiles, Japanese electronics, Japanese chips, like Japan did not retaliate because there are already soldiers in your country, right? Like that's occupation. That's 100 bases. Like that's why people are up in arms about cop cities because that is our occupation here that is following the model of Israel and Gaza.
Say it again, Jeff, please. Say
Cop
it
cities are
again.
our occupation. They are military bases for US citizens.
It's like that's what I've been saying, but you worded it in such a succinct fashion that I feel like people can hear. Cop cities, I have chills. Look, I have chills. Cop cities are occupations for US citizens. It's military occupation for US citizens.
Exactly.
Because I think for some people they think, oh, Cop City, like they're going to be trained. Like I literally had a black man at that say to me, no, like that's where they're going to train police. And I said, what do you think they training police to do? Like,
Exactly.
what,
They
like,
have police academies
yeah,
now. They have police stations now.
like why do they need a whole quote unquote city? That's a campus. So that becomes now a place where people live, right? That becomes now a place where people are being educated and indoctrinated into a certain way of thought. That also becomes a place where not just the people who are there as cops are a part of this indoctrination, the other support staff are now. So it
Hmm.
expands and it makes it to where so many people now become indoctrinated to the necessity for this, for not just their own belief system, but their livelihood. So
Right.
now they will continue to prop it up and perpetuate it.
Right.
How do you manage knowing all of this?
Um, so I have ADHD, so I hyperfixate on things, but specifically those that like align with my values. Um, like being Filipino myself, I've had to go through my own decolonial process.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so one thing you should know is like, and everybody that's listening is the Philippines was a colony of the United States, and at one point there was discussion that about its own annexation. The only reason why it didn't become annexed is because of the racism of the United States, of like Filipinos, if we annex the Philippines, then they would get to participate in our politics. They would have access to our land. And so it never happened. Um,
This country, yo, the racism never ceases to amaze me in its versatility.
yeah, I mean, like it's embedded in the foundation of this country. And so with Philippines being a former colony and then also now being a neo colony, like there are still U.S. military bases on in the Philippines now. Like it really impacted the Philippines economically, and there are these things called OFWs. They are overseas Filipino workers, which is a term that is used by the government because these people have to go overseas because they can't find a living in the Philippines. And then about $200 billion a year are remittances by these overseas Filipino workers, sending it back home.
Like in
And
Dubai.
exactly. And so that actually is my story. I am a son of an OFW. I was born in Saudi Arabia, and for the first 4 years of my life, I barely saw my mother, to the point when she would come back, I would tell her she's not my mom, and it's actually my aunts are my mom. And so that is like the consequence of U.S. imperialism personally. And later on we immigrated. Where we found our belonging is an evangelical church, immigrant evangelical church, and I became at one point an evangelical minister working for a Christian nonprofit. It was actually in that space that I began my decolonial process. Was when I, went on a quote unquote mission trip to the Philippines back in my homeland. And we were living in the slum community. And not only that, but there was education of how it's not just hard work that differentiates who gets to succeed or not, but like the consequences of US imperialism. So there I was in 2014 living amongst this slum community with um, people that look like me, both all of us like impacted by US empire. But I was just impacted in a way that granted me the privilege that I had, whereas they were given poverty. And so that like messed me up. It's like I could have easily been them. So that really informed my understanding of like how systems come into play that distinguishes the outcome of one's life versus somebody else's. It's not just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but these very real systems impact who gets to succeed, who gets to thrive, and who is stuck in abject poverty. And then oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, please go ahead.
And then that following year, I actually got fired for my LGBTQ affirming views by this Christian nonprofit. And so my entire life, where I found belonging in the Christian evangelical church, I began to question everything. And that's actually when I began to consume other things besides Christian literature and the Bible, to where it slowly began to radicalize me. And that was in 2015. And then 2016, of course, Trump gets elected. And I was living in the Bay Area at the time. So I was got involved in like protests and marches and like blocking freeways and even almost getting into a fight with Antifa people. Like it was just like one thing after another of like my own radicalization. But even as those events happen, events are new, can be a neutral thing, but it depends on what you do with that situation. Like I could have easily
Yep.
um, gave in to despair. Like my entire life had been flipped upside down, but I chose to just begin consuming other things that have, you know, give that I wouldn't have access were I still an evangelical in that world. It required my world being flipped upside down to actually begin making changes to the content that I consume. And, being someone with ADHD, like I'm able to consume a lot if I hyperfixate on it. So
I mean, I love that you hyper fixated on humanity.
yeah.
Essentially, like we got to figure this shit
Yeah,
out. I think it's really that. First of all, just thank you so much for sharing that story with us because I know
of
so
course.
many people can relate,
Mm,
and we even see people here in the chat saying, "Yes, I too have been in these spaces and didn't really know the words for it." But there is such an awakening that's happening right now where a lot of people feel like they're floundering, and even for myself, I wouldn't say that I was somebody who was kind of unaware or unconscious, but the amount of information,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
like I don't have ADHD, but I have ADD
mm,
self-diagnosed. And so it's like I'm just pulled, and there's a certain exhaustion that happens mentally, emotionally, I would even say physically, in just
mm,
trying to gather everything and then be intentional about how it is being processed and put out, you know? And
mm.
we dovetailed because you said that, you said something that just struck me, but I want to also come back to when you were saying, like, how do you manage knowing all of this? Like, is the hyperfixation, is there a negative to it, or is it just the way that you process?
Yeah, I think that's where community is really important. If I was just on an island by myself, like I would have given into despair already. Like the amount of content, the amount of tragedies, atrocities that we're consuming because of how evil Israel and the IDF are. Like it's horrific. But that's where I'm really grateful for the community that I have, both IRL and online, that I'm able to process these things with. And I'm grateful that I married my best friend who have taught me a lot of these things back when I was just a Southern evangelical living in the Bay Area that didn't know much, and the patience that she had for me. Like she's
Behind every great man.
exactly like honestly, like she's the reason why I started posting things because she
Right.
is very active on Instagram and like spoke up a lot and accumulated a following like and
What's her at?
Beyonks, Beyonkz, and she's actually an author. Her book is coming out this January. It's called "Unassimilable: Is the Politic of Unbelonging and Why We Shouldn't Assimilate to this U.S. Empire."
Okay, Beyonce.
Yeah,
uh,
and we're also started co-hosting a podcast called Good Thunder Pod. Um, it's a combination of our last names. So my last name was Mabute, and her last name is Louis, which is like the Anglo-nizing of Lui, which is a Chinese name, a Chinese character. So my last name means good, and her last name Lui is a Chinese character for thunder. So Good Thunder is our podcast. So we recently recorded our first podcast, and we talked about tech and empire and how Raytheon was at South by Southwest. So follow us on Good Thunder Pod on Spotify and Apple and on all the socials.
I really just love this because when we talk about what is a power couple, to me, this is the definition of a power couple. It's not about capitalist gain, it's about capitalist change. You know what I'm saying?
I like that.
Ooh, that was a good one.
That was good.
Thank you. I really appreciate just your insights so much. And I think the biggest thing for me that I'm sure a lot of people are going to echo here is that we believe you.
Thank
Like
you.
you have a you have an authenticity and a genuineness to what you're saying that I think is what people are really craving, right? That is where people I think are so disrupted right now, is really coming to understand that the names and the faces that they had maybe just trusted in because that's who's in front of you all the time, that they really cannot be trusted. And not because they're necessarily duplicitous or, really out to get folks, but because by nature of their role, they are simply just arbiters of the authoritarian message.
Right.
I just never really knew that these news reporters are simply just sentinels for these messages. And when you see how there's these news stations all over America, they really are just satellites for getting the same messaging out to Americans that the government wants us to get. And it's like,
it's the marketing arm for empire.
It's bonkers.
Yeah.
I saw a meme the other, or a tweet, or yeah, I saw a tweet the other day where someone said that they were talking to their friend from China, and their friend was like, it's actually interesting to see how many Americans watch the news. And they said, well, why? And the friend said, because in China, we all know that the news is propaganda, so no one watches it. Like,
that's good.
Bonkers. So this is the last question that I wanted to bring up that someone asked. So if they're already controlling the media narrative, what is the point of this TikTok ban? And I think this is a really great way to end this, because sometimes what we think is the obvious, really not.
Yeah. I think, it's what that quote by Martin Luther King, like a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? A threat to injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. And the ways that Israel is being losing its status as like a real country in the world, it's being made into a pariah state, and the fact that Israel is an extension of the U.S. empire, and people are using this tool, this um, TikTok as a tool to mobilize people for the freedom of Palestine, can be used to mobilize people to free America. And at the end of the day, is like, just as Palestine needs to be free, we here in the Imperial Court needs to be free. So a threat to an extension of the empire like Israel is a threat to the empire itself.
Mic drop. Mic drop. Okay, that's the mic drop. So for the person over here on Instagram Live who asked why or how has TikTok helped black people in America, there's some information for you. Thank you so much, Jeff. I can't thank you enough for sharing your thoughts with us and your time.
Yeah, pleasure is mine. I'm glad to be here. Excited to have this conversation with you. It was a lot of fun.
No, listen, I think that people really learned a lot. And that is really, I feel like, my part of this revolution. Like, how can I galvanize people to even, think that, to even know that they don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
The fish doesn't know it's wet.
The fish doesn't know it's wet. I want you all to make sure that you follow Jeff and his wife Bianx on Instagram, so you can follow them. Oh wait, no, hold on, I gotta fix something right here. Tito Senpai. And I want to remind you guys that you can please email me at bookings@divaworksinc.com. I put it in the chat. If you are not getting your YouTube alerts that I'm going live, so that I can share it with my contact at YouTube and let them know that I am being shadow banned actively. I also want to remind you to check out my radio show, The Amanda Seales Show, wherever you get your podcasts. And also, we're syndicated in a number of cities. My tour dates are below, so I will actually be in Texas on
coming to Houston.
I'm not coming to Houston right now. We are working on that date, though, so I'm sure I will be
when you do, I will buy that ticket for sure.
You don't have to buy a ticket, Jeff. I got one for you.
Oh, thank you. I will see you for sure then.
Make sure you spread the word.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely.
So get your tickets, guys. Go to amandaseales.com. I'm doing stand-up, but in some cities, I'm also screening my political comedy documentary In Amanda We Trust. And we're also doing we're doing a forum where I bring on, organizers to talk about the work that they're doing. I also do that at my stand-up shows, but we also do trivia in the beginning. The audience gets involved. We give away free things. Like, it's just really a space to consider what we can consider. And that is what I really am trying to do, like really create space of community. Jeff, you said something that I think was very important. You said, I have been able to kind of manage all of this knowledge and information because I have a community not only on socials, but in real life that I can interact with people. And everybody who's come on here has said that in some shape, way, or form, that they have people that they can share this information with and bounce things off of each other. Like you gain more insight. This has become a space like that for me. I feel like I've had that space IRL, but didn't necessarily have that space in the social media space. And so I created the Common Sense Kickback to be able to have conversations with people like yourself. And if you haven't checked out the other Common Sense Kickbacks, trust me, they are worth it. There's so much valuable information.
Really good stuff. I watched them. It's great stuff. And you're building really great things here. So thank you for all that you do. Like, love your work. Great job.
Thank you. Now on Monday, I will be doing a live with Eva from If Not Now. And that is going on. Oh no, that's not that Monday. Sorry, I can't tell like what time is. So that's going on Monday, the 25th at noon. I will put that on the screen right now. So that's Monday, 3/25 at noon PST. Eva from If Not Now.org. So make sure that you mark your calendars for that, because you might not get an alert. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. Also want to remind you again, if you're watching this on YouTube, please put in the chat, the timestamps of anything that you really felt like was impactful, was enjoyable, or, just kind of moved you. And last but not least, remember, and I always say this, we are each other's business. When we look out for each other, we lift each other up. I thank y'all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.